Okay, so today is April 16th, 2021, and that means we've been living in a global pandemic for 401 days, I think. I generally don't have to count past 8 in my job, so my math isn't the best. Correct me if I'm wrong. Either way, we're into it over a year at this point, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about what it's like to be a musician living through COVID-19. Before I go into it any further, I do want to take a moment just to acknowledge that this is my experience and my experience only. I know that there are people who are much worse off in the music industry and other industries across the board, as well as people who are faring far better. So this is what I've experienced in the past year, both positives and negatives. To give some context, let's just take a second and rewind back to before 2020, or maybe just the beginning of 2020, before shit hit the fan. I'll give you guys a quick look at what I was up to so you can see how much it's changed over the course of a year. So back at the beginning of 2020, I owned a music school not far from my home here in North Bay, Ontario. We had about 5 or 6 teachers working for us and a little over 100 students at the time. On top of running the school with a partner, I was doing a lot of teaching there and also hosting a drop-in community choir at a brewery in town. At the same time, I was gigging quite regularly with 2 artists and picking up some other gigs on the side. Throughout 2019 and into the beginning of 2020, between all those different jobs, I was definitely overworking myself, not taking enough time to rest, and I was honestly just doing it because I thought that's what I had to do in order to make a sustainable living in music. I definitely experienced some pretty nasty burnout, and in hindsight, the warning signs had been there for a while, although I did just keep pushing them aside because I thought I had to keep working or my whole career would just totally disappear. Towards the end of 2019 and in the beginning of 2020, I sat down and I took stock of where I was really at, and I made some pretty hard career decisions. I decided I wanted to give up the music school just because it wasn't for me. I didn't love managing other people and dealing with other people's students. I really liked teaching, but I could do that without the school. I also decided I was going to start taking less and less gigs. I was going to focus more time on the 2 artists that I primarily work with and maybe just a handful of other side gigs, and stop taking the bar gigs or the one-off gigs that you have to put almost, a whole week into to go play 1 or 2 gigs and make very little money at the end of the day, considering how much you work. The plan was to finish out the year at the school, finish up in June, have the summer to shut down, move out, get everybody kind of on their way and set up in what they needed to do, and I'd be setting up here in this home studio actually. Gigs were really ramping up for me at this point in terms of quality and quantity. I did have a lot of really great opportunities towards the end of 2019 and into 2020, including playing at the NAC in Ottawa with their symphony orchestra and traveling internationally for the first time in February of 2020. Little did I know things were about to change in a big way. At the end of February, I'd taken off for a couple of gigs for about a week in the States, and leaving, COVID wasn't even on my mind. However, in just the short time that we were there, things really changed. I remember getting a phone call from my partner Kelly when we landed in Las Vegas, saying that she was going to stock up because it looked like things were going to get pretty crazy around here. And honestly, at that point, I just kind of laughed it off, went about my day, hung out at the pool, played my gigs, and came home. I did notice a couple of people wearing masks in the airport and on planes, although I thought they were just being overly cautious, or maybe they were just coming from countries that were already more affected. I didn't think anything of it. I arrived home at the beginning of March, and things with COVID were really starting to pick up, especially in other countries. We were seeing lots more cases documented, and there was definitely a sense of panic in the air. I just went about my business, running the school as usual, doing my teaching. We were still running the choir, and I was prepping for another gig sometime around March 10th or 11th, I think, and I did not know, but that was going to be my last gig for a while. As the WHO declared a global pandemic and we started to see some more cases in Canada, it was time to actually face reality and figure out how we were going to move forward. Generally, March break was a week off for us, no students, and we actually ended up having to use the entire break to move the whole school online. We went into it thinking we'd be shut down for 2 weeks or a month and then kind of back to normal, finish out the year as planned, have a recital, all that stuff. But that 2 weeks turned into 4, and then 4 turned into 6, and 6 turned into 12, and here we are about a year later. So teaching's all online, gigs are definitely not happening, and just before everything shutting down, I got hired to play some guitars on a record. It looked like that was going to have to get put on the back burner too, unless I could figure out how to do it at home. With all the extra time on my hands, I figured maybe it was a good opportunity to dig into that world, thinking if we were going to be shut down any longer, maybe it would be a good way to make some extra income. At that point, my recording skills were pretty limited. I was able to do some work for students and I was able to create some demos for myself, but that was about it. After consulting with my buddy Ben, who was the engineer and producer on that project, we figured it would definitely be doable. I'd just use my HX Stomp for all my tones. As long as I could just send him a DI signal that he could reamp later, it was going to work out totally fine. Up until then, all of my experience recording had been going into a studio with little to no heads up on what the tunes were like, what was coming, and I never really liked that. I always wanted to prepare a little bit ahead of time. I thought I could do a much better job if I had a little bit of time with the tunes. This is the first time that I was actually afforded that luxury. Instead of having to cut all 4 tunes in one day and just letting it be what it was, I was able to actually take a week or two and spend some time with them here at home. It took a little bit longer because I had to learn how to record them. My interface exploded halfway through the project and I had to get a new one. I was just super happy to have the time. I could grab a coffee, sit down, chart out the tune, think about how I want it to sound, try some parts, go for a walk, come back, listen to them. It was actually really, really nice, and I was able to spend a lot more time creating some layered parts. Not everything got used, and so doing it this way without the producer in the room means maybe a little bit more wasted time. However, I think for me, it probably yielded a better result. Recording the electric guitars went pretty smoothly, and then there was a need to do a couple of acoustic parts. Now, I'd always been incredibly intimidated by recording acoustic. I thought, A, I didn't have the right gear to do it, B, I didn't have the knowledge, and C, I didn't have the space. I'd pretty much always written myself off in this aspect, thinking I had to go somewhere else to have it done and for it to sound good. With the confidence I'd gained from recording the electric guitar parts, I went ahead and I set up this tiny little booth in my basement made out of like curtains and blankets and pillows to try and deaden the sound a little bit, and spent a couple of days cutting some acoustics with the gear I had. Although they weren't perfect, they were definitely usable, and that experience just gave me the extra confidence I needed to go ahead and continue learning how to record acoustic at home. I remember talking to Ben about the whole process and asking him all kinds of questions, from like where to put the mics, how far away to put them, should I use 1, should I use 2, what kinds of mics should I use, and I was looking for some like really definitive answers from him. He kept coming back with some good advice, but at the end of the day, he just kept saying, use your ear. Now, if you've ever been told to use your ear and didn't really understand what you were listening for, that is a pretty frustrating experience. I just wanted definitive answers to get good results without having to do all of the legwork, and unfortunately, that's just not the reality. The more time I spent recording acoustic guitars and trying different mic techniques and different placements, the better I got at it, and really it's not as overwhelming as I thought it was in the beginning. And actually, if you guys are interested in a video on how to record acoustics, let me know down below in the comments, and that's something we can cover in a future video. Teaching online is something that's been going on for a while. I've taken a couple of guitar lessons over the last 4 or 5 years through Skype, but it's not something I ever really envisioned myself doing, because I had this idea in my head that online lessons could never be as good as in-person lessons. Although it was definitely challenging at first, and there were a lot of hurdles to overcome, learning how to use technology and the best ways to get the sound, say from Logic in for a student to hear, etc., it did become pretty natural after a while, and at this point now, I think I actually prefer teaching online compared to teaching in person. I know this isn't true for all teachers. I think it really depends on how you teach and the types of students you have. It's definitely a little bit more challenging if you have younger students, but for me, I'm finding I prefer working with more intermediate guitar players who want to progress to the next level. Generally, they're adults or maybe late teenagers, so the method of working online actually works pretty good. I would argue better. Another really great opportunity that came out of teaching online was being able to reach people outside of where I live. I'm in a pretty small town of about 50,000 people here, and finding your ideal student is a little bit more challenging when you have such a small population. This transition has led me to find more people who are wanting to learn the kinds of things I want to teach, which has let me actually really work on my own niche, and I feel like I'm a better teacher because of it. If you're enjoying the content and you're a guitar player who thinks that private lessons could benefit you and maybe this would be a good match, please feel free to get in touch at the email down below. At this point, I am currently working one-on-one over Zoom with students. I'd pretty much written off gigging for the entire summer, and later in June, I got a call about a gig for Canada Day. It was in Sauble Beach, which is just a couple hours south of me, with Susan Glukark, who's one of the artists I play with on the regular. It was a drive-in show, and it was also broadcast on the local radio station. They had a doctor on site taking temperatures, and they had people there making sure that everybody was following COVID protocol and staying safe. It was a unique experience, to say the least. I don't think I've ever been more excited to play a gig with human beings in my life. It had been a couple months since I'd made any kind of music in person, and I don't think I've ever gone more than a couple days in the last couple years. I definitely needed that mental health boost and a little bit of normalcy in my life at that point, because up until then, since March, we'd been isolating mostly in our home, aside from just doing groceries or going out to exercise. So I spent this summer teaching just a little bit, and most of my free time was spent designing and building out the studio, as well as working on some different recording projects and some fun things in music that I haven't got to do in a really long time, just because I've been so busy with gigs. As fall rolled around and I kind of got back to some normal teaching, mostly on Zoom and a little bit in person, I started to get back into the video thing and take it a little bit more seriously. I knew I needed to find some way to hold myself accountable to making these videos, so what I did was I actually reached out to Keith Williams at 5 Watt World. If you're not familiar with his channel, he's all about helping you get the most music from the least gear. Obviously, I identified with what he was doing right away. I've been trying to do that for a long time, make more music and worry less about gear, and I had a lot of similar intentions for this channel. I figured what was the worst that could happen reaching out? He would either just say no or maybe not get back to me, but it was definitely worth a try because he was someone that I really wanted to connect with on a professional level and someone that I thought I could learn a great deal from. The plan was to have a session, go off, make a couple of videos, book another session, talk about them, make more videos, so on and so forth. And so I've been really, really grateful for that relationship. Reaching out to Keith could not have happened at a better time. At the time I reached out to him, he was just starting to build a YouTube course specifically geared towards musicians who wanted to get started on the platform. Hopefully I was a good test subject because I definitely had a lot of questions. As I'm filming this video, the course is not yet currently available. However, Keith has talked about it on some live streams and on his channel, and as soon as it's available, I'll put a link in the description down below. If you're someone who's looking to get started on the platform, more specifically a musician, I highly suggest you check it out. Keith is a super thoughtful guy, and he's really generous about sharing his wealth of knowledge, so I'm sure it'll be well worth your time and money. I've thoroughly enjoyed those sessions, and it's definitely helped me with my accountability and my motivation to continue making these videos. I don't have any grand delusions about what this channel is. I'm not looking for a multi-million-dollar home or a garage full of Teslas. I'm just looking to build a community of like-minded individuals where we can all learn from each other and to be able to share what I've learned along the way, both my successes and failures. Teaching is something that I genuinely really enjoy, and this method of teaching is so much different than one-on-one, and it really allows me to explore some ideas for myself even that I've wanted to for a long time. Prior to this kind of like forced slowdown, like I mentioned earlier, I was working non-stop. I never allowed myself the break because I didn't think I could do it, and it's given me some new perspective. It's really helped me to understand that time is actually our most valuable resource as long as you can meet your financial needs and live comfortably, and that the world's not going to collapse if you don't take that gig or whatever that might be for you. As things hopefully open up a little bit more over the next year and gigging comes back, I'm certainly going to be a little more selective in how I approach it. Although I'm really excited to get back out there and make music, I've really found something I love in doing this and in teaching, especially being online. So I think I'm going to be making those my priority moving forward and really focusing on how I want to spend my time instead of how I have to spend my time. I do genuinely think it's possible to make a living in music now, not having to live in a music town or constantly be taking those kinds of gigs, and while still maintaining some kind of a normal life. Truthfully, even if I was presented with an opportunity to go back to exactly how I was living before, I don't think I'd want to do it. I want to just close by saying I know it's been a hard year for everybody for so many different reasons, and although we're definitely not out of the woods yet, I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. If you do have some extra time on your hands these days and the ability to do so, I'd encourage you guys to take that project that you've always wanted to do and never made time for and just start on it. Just a little bit here and there, see if something comes of it, because this time next year we could be living in a totally different world and maybe that little bit of free time will be gone. As always, thank you guys so much for being here. I truly appreciate your time and attention in such a noisy world. If you're enjoying the content and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so. Like this video and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you guys.